Convicted rapist is the focus of a manhunt in Detroit tonight. This time he's wanted for the murder of a woman whose body was thrown in the trash. 7 Action News reporter Alan Campbell is live with the latest on the search and the concern about violence in the city. Alan.
Well, Dave, people living in Detroit and outside of Detroit say that these recent murders need to come to an end as police continue searching right now for 50-year-old James Quill Cockerham, a suspect in the murder of 26-year-old Elizabeth Laird.
But y'all need to be careful out here.
Detroit police continue searching for 50-year-old James Quill Cockerham, a registered sex offender and a suspect in a murder investigation of a young woman on the city's east side.
They just can't be young anymore. You can't even go to the store. You can't even take the garbage out nowadays. It's crazy.
We're representing many families that are across this city.
Families of loved ones killed in recent years in the city of Detroit held a vigil to pray for peace and pray these senseless murders come to an end.
All of these young people are just dying like left and right, and it don't make any sense. Especially these young women with children.
On Wednesday, 26-year-old Elizabeth Laird's body was found in a dumpster at the Parkview Tower apartments. Officers later releasing surveillance video and a picture of a vehicle they believe to be connected to the crime. Officers later identifying the person seen in the surveillance video as James Quill Cockerham. People say the killings have to stop.
Bro, let us get help. We need help. We need something done.
And if you've seen Cockerham, you're urged to call Detroit police, or remember you can call Crime Stoppers. That number, 1-800-SPEAK-UP, and remember you can remain anonymous. Reporting live in Detroit, I'm Alan Campbell, 7 Action News.
A mother's voice trembles in the silence. My daughter was bright. She was intelligent. She always wanted to be someone special in life. Her words fade, and another voice cuts through, the broken tone of a brother. It's the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. I'm shattered in a million pieces. The screen stays dark. Then, faintly, sirens echo in the distance. A gated apartment tower stands against the Detroit skyline. Its lights flicker like silent witnesses. An elevator door slides open, empty, cold, waiting. The city has seen tragedy before, but this was different. This was deliberate, calculated, and it would leave a family torn apart and a community searching for answers. A young woman, full of dreams and a future she had worked so hard to build, walked into that building. She never walked back out. How does someone disappear in plain sight, in a place meant to feel safe? Why was she there that night? And who was the stranger seen at her side? The truth would come slowly, piece by piece, but the horror of what happened inside that tower would never be forgotten. Tonight, we begin that story.
Welcome to Twisted Crimes Files, where the darkest truths come to light. Stay with us for chilling stories you won't forget, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a case.
On the morning of May 15th, 2019, police in Detroit received a call no officer ever forgets. A maintenance worker at Parkview Towers, a gated high-rise on the city's east side, reported blood smeared inside one of the elevators. At first, it was a confusing scene. No victim in sight, no immediate explanation for the violence. But what investigators discovered within that building, and just beyond it, would reveal the final moments of a young woman whose future had been full of promise. Her name was Elizabeth Candace Laird. To her family, she was simply Candy. At just 27 years old, she stood on the edge of transformation, a student preparing to become a surgical technician, with plans to continue on as a nurse. Yet, in a single night, her aspirations vanished into tragedy. The location itself, Parkview Towers, loomed as more than just a backdrop. To many in the neighborhood, the building was a fortress secured by gates and codes, a place where residents believed they were safe from the dangers that too often marked Detroit's east side. But on that night, those walls and doors could not keep danger out. A predator found his way in. As news of the discovery spread, it struck a community already weary from crime, but still stunned by the cruelty of this act. Here was a young woman who had done nothing wrong, a visitor to see someone she loved, stepping into an elevator, never knowing that her life was about to intersect with a man intent on violence. And so the central question began to form, both for investigators and for a grieving family. How could this have happened inside a place that was supposed to protect her? To understand the weight of this tragedy, you have to know who Elizabeth Candy Laird really was. She was born and raised in Detroit, the second child of a mother who worked tirelessly to keep her family grounded. Her older brother, Curtis, often said Candy was the light of their family, the one who carried joy into every room, the one who believed her future would shine brighter than her past. From an early age, Candy had ambition stitched into her character. She wasn't content with simply getting by. She wanted to excel. In school, she was the kind of student teachers remembered, sharp, determined, with a smile that disarmed even the hardest days. Friends called her loyal, steady, and always willing to put her own needs aside to help someone else. As she grew older, those qualities deepened into purpose. Candy enrolled in a surgical technician program, a stepping stone toward her ultimate dream, becoming a nurse. She imagined herself in scrubs, in hospital corridors, at the side of patients who needed comfort and care. She envisioned herself saving lives. Not in theory, but in practice every single day. Outside of school, she wasn't just a student or a dreamer. She was a daughter who made her mother proud, a sister who could be counted on, and a friend whose laughter lingered long after she left the room. To those closest to her, Candy wasn't just a nickname. It was a reflection of her sweetness, the tenderness she carried into every interaction. Her life was not extravagant, but it was full of hope. She didn't chase luxury. She chased meaning. She didn't measure success in possessions, but in the difference she could make in the lives of others. And that is what makes the story that follows so unbearable. Because just as Candy was preparing to step into the life she had worked so hard for, it was all taken away, not by accident, not by fate, but by someone else's deliberate cruelty. On the night Candy lost her life, she wasn't wandering aimlessly or caught in some reckless decision. She was doing something familiar, something safe in her eyes, visiting her boyfriend at Parkview Towers. Their relationship wasn't a headline or a spectacle. It was quiet, steady, the kind of connection that gave her balance amid the weight of school and responsibility. Friends described Candy as someone who gave love generously. When she cared for someone, she showed up for them, no matter how tired she was from long nights of studying or early mornings at clinicals. That night, as she approached the gated entrance of Parkview Towers, there was no sign of what awaited her. For Candy, the building was a destination she knew well, a place where she felt comfortable, a place where she could unwind in the company of someone she trusted. Inside those walls, she thought she was stepping into safety. The apartment complex itself told a different story. To outsiders, its locked gates and multiple towers stood as protection against the crime-heavy streets of Detroit's east side. But to residents, those gates didn't just keep danger out. Sometimes they trapped it in. Visitors entered and exited daily, and not everyone who walked past those doors had good intentions. Candy couldn't have known that someone else was there that night. Someone who had no business being inside. A man with a violent history who had managed to slip through barriers meant to protect her. A predator, watching, waiting. As Candy pressed the elevator button, her mind was likely far from danger. She may have been thinking about the next exam she needed to pass, the next step in her program, or maybe the comfort of simply relaxing with her boyfriend after a long day. It was an ordinary night. For her, it was routine. But what makes this chapter of her life so haunting is the cruel irony. She entered that building because of love, and within its walls, she crossed paths with someone who only knew how to destroy it. Her life up to this point had been about healing, caring, and giving. Yet in that single building, two men represented opposite ends of her reality. One she cared for. The other was a career predator who saw her as prey. That night, those two worlds collided, and Candy, tragically, would not walk out alive. On the morning of May 14th, 2019, Elizabeth Candace Candy, Laird began her day like any other. The city of Detroit stirred awake around her. The low hum of buses, the faint traffic along Robert Bradby Drive, the cool air of a spring morning that carried no warning of what was to come. Inside her home, Candy moved with quiet purpose, books and notes scattered near the door, her mind already tethered to her studies. She was close, so close, to completing the program that would launch her into the medical field she had worked tirelessly to reach. Coffee in hand, keys at her side, she stepped in her day without hesitation, carrying ambition like a second skin. Late in the morning, she slipped into the rhythm of class and clinical training, the measured pace of a surgical tech program that demanded precision. Her classmates saw a woman who belonged in this environment, sharp-eyed and determined, a student who balanced exhaustion with drive. At some point, she checked her phone, exchanging a message that later would become significant in its simplicity. She would stop by Parkview Towers that night to see her boyfriend. To her, it was a routine plan, familiar and comforting, a way to end her day with companionship before heading home. The afternoon passed without incident. Candy moved between tasks, her hours filled with the ordinary obligations of a young woman on the cusp of a professional breakthrough. She spoke briefly with family, simple, unremarkable conversations that would later take on the unbearable weight of being the last. By early evening, the city changed tone. Porch lights clicked on, commuters hurried home, and Detroit's east side prepared for another restless night. Candy prepared too. She gathered her things, freshened up, and headed toward the high-rise she had entered many times before. Parkview Towers rose against the night sky, its gated entrance casting an image of protection. For Candy, the building was not a place of danger, but of routine. She passed through the gates as countless others did each day, unaware that on this night, safety was a fragile illusion. Inside the lobby, sterile fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors as she pressed the button for the elevator. It was the kind of moment so ordinary it usually evaporates from memory. The doors slid open and she stepped inside. But she wasn't alone. Another figure moved in behind her, a man she did not know, a man she had no reason to fear in that instant. The elevator doors sealed them into a narrow space, for mirrored walls bearing silent witness. For Candy, it was just a ride upward, a brief pause before she arrived at her destination. For him, it was the opening he had been waiting for. The camera above captured them together, time-stamped images that would later become the last clear record of her life. The doors opened on the 8th floor. Candy walked into a quiet corridor, lined with doors and dim overhead lights. At the end of the hallway sat the laundry room, ordinary, unremarkable, yet investigators would later determine it was here the nightmare began. What unfolded in that sterile, windowless space was not chance but predation. Force replaced routine. Fear replaced familiarity. A man with a history of violence pressed his will against a woman who had only come there out of love and trust. From the laundry room, the scene shifted to the service hallways most residents rarely noticed. Candy, under duress, was forced toward the trash room, a place meant for the disposal of objects, not human beings. The chute gaped open, its metal mouth leading down into darkness. What investigators would later piece together is almost unbearable to imagine. Candy was still alive when she was pushed inside. The compactor waited at the bottom, a machine designed for crushing. Her life, once so full of purpose and hope, ended not in a hospital surrounded by patients she dreamed of saving, but in the cold machinery of a building that had failed to protect her. That night passed in silence. Inside the tower, televisions flickered, residents slept, and the building carried on with its hidden horror locked within its walls. Elsewhere in the city, Candy's phone lay still. Messages went unread. Calls went unanswered. A family, not yet knowing, assumed she would call in the morning. When dawn came, a maintenance worker began his routine, walking the hallways with the unhurried pace of habit. In the elevator, something caught his eye, streaks of blood where there should have been none. Alarm rose in his chest as he followed the trail, step by step, until it led him to the service area. Behind the heavy door, the answer waited. He alerted authorities, his voice carrying the kind of urgency that only comes when you know you've stumbled into something no one should see. By 9 that morning, Detroit police converged on Parkview Towers. Yellow tape cordoned off entryways, officers moved in and out. Radios crackled with clip commands. They followed the path from elevator to chute, collecting fragments of the night's violence. And then, the discovery. Elizabeth Candace Laird, the young woman who only hours before had been filled with plans and promise, lay discarded in the compactor below. The medical examiner would later record her cause of death as compressive asphyxia, precise, clinical language for something too cruel to be contained by words. Neighbors whispered from balconies and sidewalks as news spread. The sight of flashing lights, the presence of so many officers, told them enough. Families drew their children close, asking who could have done this, how someone had slipped into their fortress-like building unnoticed. For Candy's family, the morning unfolded with unbearable cruelty. When a knock came on their door, when solemn voices spoke words no mother or brother should ever have to hear, time fractured. The world they knew had collapsed. And yet, for detectives at Parkview Towers, the timeline was only beginning to take shape. Surveillance footage, digital records, forensic evidence. The pieces were there, waiting to be connected. In those first critical hours, one fact became clear. Candy's death was no accident. She had entered the elevator with a predator, and that predator was already on their radar. When Detroit police stepped into Parkview Towers on the morning of May 15th, 2019, they were met with a scene that immediately told them this was no ordinary call. Blood inside an elevator, a trail leading down the hallway, silence that pressed against the walls as if the building itself knew something unspeakable had happened. Officers followed the trail to a service door, heavy, cold, metallic. Behind it, the smell hit them first, and then came the sight. Inside the dumpster at the base of the chute, the crumpled form of a young woman. Elizabeth Candy Laird, 27 years old, just days from finishing her program. Now lifeless, discarded. The compactor's machinery had already crushed down upon her, erasing dignity, but not the truth of what had been done. The call went out. Detectives, forensics, medical examiners. The building was sealed off, elevators taped, hallways marked. Residents peered from behind doors, hushed conversations spreading faster than the official word. By mid-morning, news cameras gathered outside the complex, trying to catch a glimpse of what the city was whispering about. A body discovered in a place reserved for trash. The medical examiner arrived and made it official. Manner of death, homicide, caused compressive asphyxia. Cold, clinical language that masked a violent, deliberate act. For investigators, it was both confirmation and a question. Someone had forced Candy into that chute. But who? And how had they gotten inside a building locked to outsiders? The police chief himself, James Craig, spoke later that day, his words sharp with anger. He described the suspect as a violent, predatory coward. But at that moment, the name behind that description was not yet public. All investigators had was surveillance footage, blood evidence, and the certainty that a killer had walked those halls. Detectives turned to the camera in the elevator. Its lens had captured a crucial sequence. Candy stepping inside, followed by a man. His face partially shadowed, his stance casual but calculated. That image, a woman unaware, a predator beside her, became the anchor of the case. They enhanced it, circulated it internally, and began the painstaking process of identifying him. At the same time, investigators combed the building. They knocked on doors. Residents recalled a stranger loitering in the lobby. Some said they saw a man watching, waiting. Others admitted they hadn't noticed anyone unusual at all. That was the predator's gift, the ability to move in unnoticed, to blend in long enough to strike. Evidence mounted quickly. Blood swabs from the elevator matched Candy. A sweep of the laundry room revealed signs of a struggle. Down in the trash area, forensic teams collected fibers, prints, and anything the compactor had not destroyed. Slowly, a timeline took shape. Candy entered the elevator alive. She was forced into the laundry room. From there, dragged toward the chute, and then pushed, alive, into the darkness below. But the key break came not from fingerprints or witnesses. It came from technology. Detectives learned that a man already on parole, a registered sex offender with a violent past, was wearing a GPS tether. The data placed him inside Parkview Towers at the very same hours Candy was there. His name was James Quill Cockerham. This was not a stranger to the system. His criminal record read like a blueprint of danger. Weapons charges, armed robbery, car theft, criminal sexual conduct. A man who should have been nowhere near Candy, nowhere near that building. Yet the tether told the truth. He had been there. And surveillance showed him beside her. With that evidence, theories collapsed into fact. This was no robbery gone wrong. Not jealousy. Not mistaken identity. This was predation. A man who waited in the lobby for opportunity. A man who followed an innocent woman into an elevator, used violence in an isolated room, and then chose a method of disposal as cruel as it was deliberate. Detectives now had a suspect, but they also had a city on edge. If a career criminal could slip into a gated tower and commit a murder this brazen, who else was at risk? How many times had he blended into the background without notice? And why had the system allowed him to walk free long enough to encounter Candy at all? The hunt for James Cockerham was on. In the days that followed, the shockwave of Elizabeth Candy, Laird's death rippled far beyond the walls of Parkview Towers. For her family, time had stopped. Her mother, Diana, could barely summon the words through tears. She didn't deserve this. My daughter was bright. She was intelligent. She always wanted to be someone special in life. Her brother Curtis, his voice broken, said, "It's the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. I'm broken up in a million pieces." They spoke not only of her loss, but of who she was. A daughter who wanted to heal others. A sister who gave everything to the people she loved. Friends remembered her as generous, focused, someone who laughed easily, someone they all believed was about to rise into the career she had fought so hard for. Michael Hines, a close family friend, said, "She was a great young lady, and I loved her. She had a bright future. She told me she was going to make something of herself." For them, the horror of her final moments was unbearable. But even more unbearable was the silence of her absence. The community rallied in vigils. Candles lined sidewalks. Balloons floated against the night sky. People prayed together, cried together, demanding justice for the young woman who had been taken from them in such a degrading, violent way. In those gatherings, anger mixed with grief. Why had a registered sex offender, a man with a history of violence, been free to harm again? Why had the system failed to protect someone who had never asked for more than a chance to live out her purpose? Meanwhile, detectives closed in on the man they already knew had been in that elevator with her. On May 18th, for days after Candy's body was found, they arrested James Quill Cockerham on Detroit's west side. He was no mystery figure. His past was littered with convictions for armed robbery, car theft, weapons charges, and sexual assault. Now he faced charges that would define his name forever. First-degree murder, torture, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple counts of criminal sexual conduct. In February 2020, his case went to trial. Jurors were shown the surveillance footage, the tether data, the forensic reports. They heard about Candy's final moments, how she was assaulted, forced down the hallway, and pushed alive into a trash compactor chute. They saw the evidence that placed Cockerham in every critical frame, every damning location. Witness after witness, expert after expert, drew the same conclusion. The crime was deliberate, brutal, inescapable. For Candy's family, each day in court was a wound reopened. They sat through the details that no mother should hear, no brother should imagine. Yet they stayed, because to walk away would be to leave her story incomplete. And when the verdict came, guilty on all counts, there was no celebration, only relief mixed with sorrow. Justice and law could never bring Candy back, but it could at least promise that this predator would never harm another innocent woman again. In March 2020, the sentence was handed down. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words carried finality, but also frustration. As Curtis said, he should have never been let out. To the family, the system had failed Candy long before that night in May 2019. Even years later, the pain does not fade. Appeals have been filed, rejected, upheld. But none of that changes the reality that a young woman who wanted to save lives was instead robbed of her own. And so, the question lingers. How does a society stop predators like this before they strike again? How many opportunities are too many before the system says enough? Elizabeth Candy, Laird should be alive today. She should be walking across a graduation stage, wearing her scrubs in a hospital, comforting patients with the same warmth she gave her family. Instead, her name is spoken in memorials, her face printed on vigil posters, her story replayed in news archives. As the city reflects, one truth remains clear: Candy's life mattered, and telling her story ensures that it will never be forgotten. For her family, the wound will always remain. For the community, her death is a reminder of the dangers that can walk among us unchecked. And for all of us, it is a call to awareness, to vigilance, to demand better safeguards so that no one else has to suffer what Candy endured. This is not just a story of crime. It is a story of love, loss, and a stolen future. So tonight, as we remember Elizabeth Candy, Laird, let her memory be more than a tragedy. Let it be a warning, a lesson, and a vow that her dreams will not vanish into silence, that her family's grief will not be ignored, and that her story will keep others safe. If this case moved you, help keep her memory alive. Share her story. Talk about her life. Demand accountability. And most of all, remember her not just for how she died, but for the light she carried into every moment she lived. For Candy, for her family, for justice. If Candy's story touched you tonight, I ask you to help us honor her memory. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so more voices like hers are never silenced by time. Every click, every share, every comment keeps her story alive and ensures her name is remembered. So join us, not just as viewers, but as witnesses, to say her life mattered, her dreams mattered, and her story will never be discarded.